Hello, my name's Dr. Kaylee.
And I'm Dr. Leanne.
And I'm Dr. Ashley, and we are psychologists.
Welcome to the 8th episode of our podcast, Do You Ever Feel? In these podcasts, we talk about common experiences and dilemmas that people have, and we unpick the psychology behind that. This week, we're going to be talking about a topic that we get asked a lot as psychologists by parents, and it's about how do we manage children's emotions. So this episode is, do you ever feel like it's difficult to manage your child's emotions? So thinking about that, Leanne, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the common scenarios are?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, as psychologists, we get asked this question so many times by parents, also teachers, and children become emotionally dysregulated for a variety of different reasons. First of all, they're growing up, they're living in a world that's confusing and, can be quite frustrating or anxiety inducing. So of course, the natural reaction is, I don't really know how to cope with this. And as adults as well, we have to kind of model that. And I know that we're going to obviously talk about that later on as well. But of course, children don't know that yet. So they can become quite anxious or maybe have low mood or become frustrated. There's a variety of different reasons why. It could be, for example, that they've had a little bit of a falling out with somebody, one of their friends. It can be that they're struggling with sharing toys. It can be that they're really frustrated because there's overwhelming sensory differences kind of going on in the environment as well. It can be that maybe they're feeling frustrated at school, that they're not achieving academically and that's annoying for them or upsetting. It can be, for example, that there's something going on at home as well. Maybe there's been a trauma or something has happened, falling out with siblings. There's so many different reasons why children can be emotionally dysregulated. These are just a few off the top of my head. But the important thing, of course, is to know how we can actually deal with those and how we can support children to kind of build up that emotional literacy, to know why they're feeling that way, how that feels in their body, what they can do to problem solve in those situations. Because as I say, they're navigating a world that's really challenging for them because they're growing up, and it's something that we kind of take for granted as adults sometimes, and we need to kind of support them through that and model that so that they can become more healthy and have the best emotional well-being and get their full potential.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we get asked, because it's part of human experience to have these emotional ups and downs, and one of the things I think parents want to know is what strategies are helpful and that support like emotional well-being and resilience in the long term. Ashley, do you have some strategies that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like, first of all, sometimes it can be quite nice to have something that you can use in the moment, when they are really very distressed, very dysregulated, or something practical that you can actually use. So one thing that I like to recommend is something called a calm box. And all this simply is it's a box that you fill with little sensory toys, little things that are important to the child that can help them calm down. And what we tend to find is that the kind of different toys, like things like like sensory things like fidget toys or Play-Doh, like things that you use your hands, that can be very, very calming. It can just like help regulate and just like calm down, and things like stress balls, and or it might even be, there's a child I work with, he actually loves having like crosswords, word searches and things, and I think that's what it is because it just kind of keeps him focused, and and when he's starting to feel that he's his emotions are kind of deteriorating, and he can just like sit and like go access his calm box, go through like the puzzles and the crosswords and word searches and things like that. So I think it's personalized to the individual. Like, no two calm boxes should look the same because we all like different things. So yeah, there's lots of different things. Just I would say, like, have a conversation with the child and work out what's important to them. Do they like puzzles? Do they like things like Rubik's Cubes and things like that? Fidget toys, some Play-Doh. They might even like little like in a little stories or little poems or things that are special to them, or they might even like things like like scents, because like certain smells can be really calming. and really relaxing. So I know lots of children quite like the smell of like lavender because they can find this to be very, very soothing. And so they can have like that in there. And what I would say as well is like this box, it could be really nice like if they actually spend some time like decorating it and making it special. And it's really important that they're involved in the process of deciding what goes in the box, because it's something that's going to help them. So that's something that you could do. It could be like a nice activity to do before obviously they are obviously in that dysregulated state, and then what you would do is when you do notice that things are deteriorating a little bit, you could prompt them and say, oh, maybe it's a good idea for you to access your CAM box. And this is something that if the child is struggling particularly in school as well, it'd be helpful to speak to the teacher and maybe have a CAM box in the class, and then they know exactly where to find it, and they can actually access that themselves whenever they need that. And then you might want to have one at home as well. So yeah, it's all about making sure it's important and special for them. So that's like something I suppose that's quite kind of practical, because it's like something you can, access the box and go through the activities or the toys and things like that. That's something
I really like how that's so proactive and it's not reactive, because as you say, you've given that child that autonomy to say, what kind of things do you like when you are calm? What kind of things are you doing, or what can kind of help you to, get back into that state? So you're kind of like keeping them on board with that, so you're autonomous, but at the same time, it's not reactive that, oh my gosh, this child's having a meltdown. What are we going to do? Okay, here's some toys, because that's not going to be helpful.
No.
Like if they know that that's the strategy that's there for, they're not seeing it as a punishment either. Because if you're like, okay, you need to go to your safe space now, they're going to see that as a negative thing. So the fact it's so proactive and you're talking through that is so helpful. And I wonder if as well, what could also be good is if the adult as well in that scenario also has something like that, so the kid can see that they have their one, they can maybe do them together. That'd be like quite a nice thing
to model that,
like a nice kind of activity to do, like a bonding exercise as well.
It
also like celebrates that kind of difference of, these are things that calms me, but these might be the things that calm you. And then even the kid might be able to say, that child to their parent, to say, I think you're getting a bit stressed out, mummy or daddy, and like maybe we should have your calm box. How cute would
that would be nice. Because I was even just thinking as well, like I know that lots of children find, Lego can be so therapeutic, and it's like building like little different things with it. And I think there's really something in that, like keeping your hands busy. It can just like be really, really calming and soothing. So yeah, no, that's a great idea. I really like that, the idea that the adult would model that to the child. And it's because we all have our moments, and we all have our own different coping strategies. And I suppose, like you said before, some children, it's just that they've not necessarily learned how to do it. So we're giving them the tools and the resources of like, you know what, when you do feel like this, here are some things that you can do to help manage that. And also, so there's a really good book I really like as well that for children, and it's called The Hidden Chimp. It's by Professor Steve Peters, and he's the author of The Chimp Paradox. The book, the idea about we all have this chimp within us, that this emotional part of the brain that we need to control, and once we can control that, we can have a happier life, be more successful in things. So what he's actually done, he's actually written a book, and it's fantastic. The kids absolutely love it. The illustrations that they have, they're very, very they're just amazing. They're really, really nice. And what I like about this is it's teaching the child this idea that, okay, well, when that happened, it was my chimp. And it's almost like that externalizing, like that changing like the narrative of like, it was my chimp that made me do that, and things like that. So it can be quite helpful. And I quite like the children I work with tend to feed back that they really enjoy the activities, and I think it just makes it real for them, and it gives them, it's a nice little visual, because I feel it's quite difficult to explain, we have this emotional part of the brain, we have this logical part of the brain, but when we put it in a little like this little image of like, it's the chimp, we've got the chimp part of our brain and we've got our human part of the brain, so I recommend that as well. But again, that's something that you'd be working on, and hopefully it'd be like feeding back those messages. And just over time, the child would learn to identify that, it just gives them the understanding of how their brain, how their mind works, and why they might experience different emotions. So I always recommend that book. It's a fantastic book, The Hidden Chimp, it's called. And it's interesting, there's another really good book that I always recommend, is called The Whole Brain Child. And I really like this book because it kind of gives you an insight into like brain development, how the brain's structured, and why we might be seeing certain things in certain children. And what I really like about this is this book gives you 12 parenting strategies that you can apply pretty much straight away. And it's just, I suppose it's just a different way of thinking about how you approach something. And they have this analogy, and I really, really like this. The idea is like, say, for example, a child is, playing, and like they throw a toy. They throw a toy at their friend, they throw a toy at their brother, their sister. And as adults, like the natural reaction is like, why did you do that? Like, what were you thinking? Like, and in that moment, the child's like, I don't know, or I didn't do it. And, it's really, really difficult for them to actually, like, communicate and make those connections about why they acted the way that they did. And what they're saying is, like, they talk about this idea about we need to understand the structure of the brain. And once we understand that, we can change our approach and we can actually help make a difference through that way. And they have this analogy of the brain. It's like, if you imagine, like, you have your fist there, and that this is your brain, and you've got, like, your brain stem here, which controls all your breathing, your heart rate, all those kind of things. Then you've got your emotional part of the brain, and then you've got your logical part of the brain that just kind of like sits on top. But what happens is when a child becomes dysregulated, they say that, like, they flip the lid, so the logical part comes off, and then what you're doing is you're confronting the emotional part. Now, as adults, it can be really tricky because, like, when the child throws a toy, we logically ask them, why did you do that? What were you but they're in that emotional state. So it's not actually the best time, because what we need to do in that moment is actually help manage the emotions before we can get to that situation of having that conversation about how we maybe act differently in the future. And in the Whole Brain Child, they talk about this idea that, say you were a lifeguard and you can see that someone's in the sea, they're struggling, maybe they're drowning at sea. You wouldn't swim up to the person that's struggling in the sea and start shouting at them, why did you do that? You shouldn't have like swum out so far, like you're out too far, it's too dangerous. What you simply do in that moment is your priority is getting them to safety. So you put your arms around them, you take them safely back to the shore. Once they're safe, once they're calm, then you can have that conversation of, okay, maybe next time it's not such a good idea to go out so far. Yeah. But it's just, I thought it was just such a powerful one, because it's like that way, it's like knowing about the time and the place about when to have those conversations, because we want to have those conversations. We want the child to learn from the lessons and things like that. But it's all about our timing and the right approach in order for it to have the maximum impact. So that's just some things that I think are it's just like quick, nice little ideas that, like, just to remind ourselves. Because sometimes I feel like as adults, it's like we do things automatically. We have our automatic responses, and sometimes we can be talking to children and we're expecting them to respond as adults, and have that, like, that emotional literacy, that understanding of, oh, well, I threw my toy because I feel very frustrated because of this, that, and whatever. But it is a process. We need to help and support and coach and model and give children the strategies and the tools to help manage their emotions.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing from everything you've explained is that it's a skill. It's a skill that can be developed, and it's very much the adult as the guide, because children are little explorers, and they're not born with the ability to be able to manage their emotions straight away. This is something they'll learn over time based on what they're observing and how the adults around them are modelling how they manage their own emotions. Something interesting came up for me as you guys were talking, and I think it would be quite helpful for us to share a little bit of insight on it, because a common strategy that I see being used is timeout.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, all the time.
This is the thing. So when we're talking about, like, concepts from the whole child brain, the reason that our strategies are informed in a certain way is because we know a lot more about the brain and emotional development, because there's a lot more research being done in that area, which has changed the direction of strategies to use to promote that emotional resilience in children. So as psychologists, what do we think of an approach like timeout?
Oh gosh, I would just say that it's quite antiquated now. It's really outdated, isn't it? That it kind of it's very old school in that it's almost like a super nanny. Let's sit on the naughty step for how many minutes old you are, or something along those lines. Thinking about what you were saying, Ashley, about your analogy you used. About the lifeguard. Obviously, you want to help that young person feel safe and secure at that time. We don't know why they're emotionally dysregulated, but what you're saying is this is a punishment because you have felt an emotion that's normal. You have felt angry, you felt, frustrated, you're crying, you're whatever it is. You're telling them that emotion is not okay. To bottle that emotion up. You sit on that naughty step until you can become air quotes, normal again, regulated. And that kid has no idea why they've been put on that step. And they're just thinking, okay, so I've kind of expressed myself and I'm being punished for that. So what you're doing is you're creating a generation of children and young people who feel that they cannot articulate their emotions because that is a bad thing, rather than just saying, do you know what? You seem angry right now, and that is okay because everybody feels angry, and helping them get into that lifeguard kind of, I'm saving you, I'm kind of putting you in an area of safety before we then address why did you feel that way? How can we solve that differently in the future? So to me, it just feels, really outdated.
I feel as well, like when you think about it, it's like, what is that communicating to the child as well? It's almost like communicating, oh, your emotions are too big and too scary that me as an adult, I can't deal with this. I can't. It's like, go out of sight, sit in the sit, and then once and then you've come back. It's but I feel like it's like actually it's like I suppose it's that idea. It's like you were saying, like help the child work through that process, and maybe it's an idea of like time in rather than time out, and actually spending that time like actually working and like like validating like their experience and what they're going through, and really guiding them and helping them go through that process. But I just feel that it communicates, the idea of it is like, right, okay, out the room, sit on the naughty step, or like you've got so many minutes time out. I just feel that communicates it to a child that, oh, no one can actually deal with my big and scary. And I suppose it's actually quite sad in a way as well. If the child's got to sit there and they are so emotionally dysregulated, they don't have the tools, they don't have the strategies, and they've just got to sit with that emotion. And maybe like they might start to internalize that, and it's like maybe it's like they're not actually learning how to move forward and deal with those difficult like emotions and feelings. I think it's but it's interesting that I do feel it is still today it's a very much the go-to approach, isn't it? It's very much like punishment, it's like, or discipline. It's this idea that something's happened, so you must do it. But I feel it's interesting. There's some books, there's the book The No Drama Discipline, and it's this idea that, do you know what, it's actually okay, like discipline is actually important for children. But I think we've got this negative connotation that discipline means like things like that, like it has to be something bad, some sort of punishment, but it's not necessarily. It's just like, I suppose what we need to do is like, children do respond really well to boundaries and expectations, but we can do that in a positive way. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a bad thing for both the child and the adult. This could be a learning experience. I think it's because they talk about this idea that it's like that the moments where you feel that you're in survival mode and you don't have the time, you don't have the effort. They're actually saying, do you know what? That's exactly the time when you need to scaffold, teach, model those managing of emotions, because what will happen is you're providing them with the tools, the resources, so that in the future, rather than the same problem coming up again and again, time after time, the child is going to learn each time, and their mind is like growing and nurturing and developing. Yes, I feel like it's like these difficult moments can be opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning, and it doesn't always have to be a negative experience. It can actually be a really rich learning opportunity for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's really important for us to reflect a little bit on timeout, because it is something that's commonly used, and it is something that parents say it works. And when we think about things like, our own upbringings and what we knew about parenting strategies then, but now things have moved on because we know more now. Yeah. And so this is something that's important for us to raise, in that the reason that it works is because it's a way of suppressing emotions and building emotionally resilient children and young people and adults involves the acceptance of emotions and separating the emotion from the behavior. So I feel like it's something really important underpinning what we're discussing today, because I find that there's still a lot of shame in our society attached to expressing emotions. And even from the interactions we have with children, young people and adults alike, you'll ask them, how are they? I'm happy. And you can see that
they don't have that language. Their emotional literacy is so stunted.
They're happy.
They can't distinguish between different types of happiness even, or any other emotion they could be feeling.
There's that. And sometimes that's what they feel that adult wants to hear.
Yeah.
And so it's like a conditioned response because of these negative connotations. So if we dig a little bit below that, we know timeout is something that isn't promoting emotional validation or that being with alongside. We also know we hear a lot, don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't be sad. Don't get upset. So what message is this sending to children and young people and adults?
Yeah, we need to change the way we're parenting, I suppose. And I think that we are entering like what a lot of people refer to as like a soft parenting era. But I'm quite here for that. I think that, it's kind of paving the way for new ways of thinking. It's using the psychology that, that we've mentioned today and theories and just knowing about like how the brain works and applying that in a way which makes really well-rounded young people. But yeah, I think parents are still quite worried about that, aren't they? Because, the amount of times parents say, what do we need to do? How do we need to discipline? And like you said, Ashley, discipline doesn't have to be a negative thing.
No.
It can be a very positive thing. Discipline just means, as you said, boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Everybody needs boundaries. We feel safety in boundaries. And I think that's so, so important.
It's so interesting. I was working with a group of parents recently, and they were talking about this idea about there's a lot of pressure for parents, like in terms of like parenting and like and it's like they were talking about, obviously there's a lot of influence like social media about you do this and you don't do that, and it's like there's a lot of lots of pressure. But there was one parent in particular, they were saying like their child behaves absolutely perfectly all day, everything's great, and then they go out and they go to like the supermarket, and then like the child has an emotional meltdown, like they find it really, really difficult. And they were saying is like a lot of the time they feel the pressure because it's the other people around them, the other adults that are watching on and judging, shaking the head and that kind of thing, like being quite and because I think it's interesting. Like I suppose every parent will parent differently, and like they'll be doing whatever they think's in the best interest for their own child. But I feel like people are very quick to comment, other people about like that. Oh no, they just need like, time out, or they need like, people are too soft these days. There's all this kind of thing that there's not enough of this and not enough of that. But I just thought that was quite interesting, just that idea that they had said they were like that. If the other people weren't there, they would parent in the way that they would normally, and they would deal with it. But they felt under the pressure that because other adults were looking on, they felt that they had to do like the harsh discipline, the shouting, the very, all this kind of thing, that they felt made them feel very uncomfortable. But they felt that was almost the expectation because like of the onlookers. So I think that's quite interesting as well. It's like the pressures.
And I like the example you used there, because I think, excuse me, it kind of leads quite nicely into something that I was just thinking about, another good strategy. Because obviously you've spoken a lot, we've spoken a lot about what to do at that time, things like the calm boxes, co-regulating, those sorts of things. But what was interesting about that example is you said at home, they're absolutely fine. What we know about a lot of children, young people, home is very often their safe space. So they can kind of react in the way in which they want to, because they're at home, they're safe, they're secure, unconditional love, mum and dad look after me. You go outside somewhere different, like the supermarket, like a school. How often is it that we hear as psychologists, my kid is fine in one context and melts down another, whether that's school or home. And that's a really interesting concept because, as I say, a lot of the time children find safety at home. When they go outside, it's unpredictable.
Yes.
How are they managing that unpredictability in the world? I was saying earlier about things like overwhelming sensory sensations. There could be social interactions that are kind of uncomfortable, not knowing how to navigate that. It can be that there are differences in routine. And the strategy that I was thinking is more a precursor, not something that can be done at the time, but upon reflection to help children and young people emotionally regulate, is the concept of safety and sameness. Now, we know that even as adults, how nice it when you've got some structure, some routine, you know what's going to happen, because that ambiguity is taken away. It takes away that anxiety, makes you feel a lot more regulated because you know what's going to happen, who's going to be there, what's going to be said. And if children are put in a circumstance like a supermarket, for example, there's so many different kind of things, factors that can be impacting on their emotional regulation there. So a strategy which is something which anybody can implement is this idea of, well, it's not an idea, it's structure and routine. If you have structure and routine in your day, straight away you're giving the boundaries for children and young people. You're making sure that they know what the routine is, what's going to happen. You can talk them through that. And I think that's why a lot of children feel a lot more safe at home, because they know what's going to happen at home. Well, the majority of children will live in a predictable kind of environment. Obviously, there are circumstances of maybe like trauma or challenges at home, but obviously we're talking about, you know, the general standard day to day. So when children and young people go to school, for example, what we say is really helpful is having things like a visual timetable when they go into school, so they can see, for example, if you've got different parents dropping them off in the morning, is it mummy or daddy who's going to be dropping me off in the morning? Who's going to be greeting me at the door? What have I got first thing? A lot of children benefit from having, especially the younger ones, like a visual kind of timetable. You can even have them like on a board that is on Velcro, so they can peel them off as you go along and post them, so you know that that's been done, almost like a now and next type board, so they can see timings as well, because children quite often feel emotionally dysregulated because they don't understand the concept of time. If you know what 5 minutes is and you can hold on for 5 more minutes, fantastic. But if you don't know what 5 minutes is, that could be an eternity. So that's really helpful for that reason as well. And it's so good to have them in the home circumstance as well, especially when there's changes at home. So if you're going to go on holiday, or maybe it's school vacation, to know what you're going to be doing the next day, what that new structure and routine is going to look like, giving preparation for any changes. Is there a holiday coming up? Are we going to be visiting, you know, nanny and granddad's today? Is it going to be an off timetable day at school where they're wearing like a different school uniform, or a sports day? All of those different things, prepare them for that. Give them visual timetables, and for the older ones as well, build their independence up to be able to use things like electronic timetables and things like that, so that they can understand building up their own kind of structure and routine and what that looks like, because that's so helpful for emotional regulation, especially children and young people who feel anxious. So you know that that's such a great strategy. Also helpful if you have a child who's neurodivergent. And I know we're going to talk about that in much greater depth in a next podcast we're going to do in the future. But generally what I mean by neurodivergent is somebody whose brain thinks differently about the world. So it's not kind of what we would say is neurotypical. And so, of course, those kind of unpredictabilities are going to be much more challenging for those children and young people as well. So if you know that you have a child who is neurodivergent, that strategy is even more important as well. So that's just something you could do as a precursor to kind of help for children and young people to emotionally regulate, and it's a strategy to set up for life as well, to develop that skill.
They're really helpful tools, and it is really quite difficult for children to know what's coming next if they don't have that information, and unpredictability creates anxiety. You know, routine and structure is, as we know, incredibly important for children and adults alike as well. And I think a lot of what we've talked about today, you know, covers really, really helpful tools, thinking about what we now know about the brain and how children develop emotional regulation, which starts with co-regulation through the adult. So I think that's one thing parents can be mindful of, is when you're having a difficult day, usually your child's having a difficult day too, because they're picking up on that emotion, and it's okay to let them know that you're having a tricky day, and share what you're feeling with them as well, because that's modelling how you're regulating your own emotions, and that's critically important to do. I think a strategy that I would share is based on some research that Dr. Janet Rose did around emotion coaching, and it touches a little bit on this soft parenting style approach, but I would say that actually that is not what underpins it, because it is still about having clear boundaries and problem solving and empowering children. So we have to look at what's the rationale behind the approach. The rationale behind the approach is to normalize emotions, help children feel understood. We know that our emotions drive our behavior, and so we also know that suppressing them is not good for us. And we are so skilled at doing that as adults when we're having a bad day, because emotion coaching wasn't really around, many years ago. So there are steps that you take to use emotion coaching as a strategy. I think we could do a whole episode on that itself. It's an incredible approach. I'm obviously an advocate for it. But step number one, particularly as your children are younger and developing an understanding of their own emotional response to things, because some things come up and they don't actually know what's happening for them. So it is labeling that emotion, giving them, as you said, Leanne, the language around different emotions. Online, there are emotion wheels available for different ages that you can go through and just check in your child's understanding of that and help them to unpick. Say, for example, if they're feeling anxious, if they're feeling really frustrated, help them to unpick what that feels like in their body, and where they feel it. Do they feel that they've got tummy ache? Do they feel that they've got a fuzzy head? Or their hands getting a little bit sweaty? So they can start to recognise and pick up on those things, and they know, okay, at this moment in time, I'm feeling really worried, and this is what happens when I feel worried. Then they will know, okay, maybe I can use one of my strategies, or I can let an adult know that this is how I'm feeling. And it is very much that first stage, labeling, normalizing, and validating as much as we can, because whatever is happening in the situation, which is all very contextual, whatever behaviour we've seen, which we might not approve of, in that moment, the important thing is the emotion behind it that led to that behaviour. So with this approach, we go a step back from just responding to the surface level behaviour. We go deeper. Okay, what emotion's driving it? Check in with that emotion, because then children start to develop the ability to regulate, because they can accept it instead of pushing it away or feeling a sense of shame, suppressing and then exploding. And with that, once they're validated and in a calm state, as you talked about, Ashley, we see all the time people intervening at the stage when they're completely dysregulated. Why are you doing this? Stop, stop now. At that point, their brain isn't able to process that information. So we have to sit with them until they're calm before we can have that conversation around behaviour and look at boundary setting. So it's always important to boundary set, but as you said, the timing is crucial for that. And then if it's appropriate, problem solve with them. So the next time you feel like this, what can you do? And if the strategies come from them, even better, because it's something that works for them and it's empowering for them. So I think this is something we can definitely do a whole talk on to go into it in more detail. We actually have an emotion coaching manual, so you can reach out to us if you would like a copy of that. Did anybody have anything else that they wanted to share?
I was just going to say, it was funny when you were talking about the emotions wheel. I really like that, like all these different resources that you can use, like with different children. One thing I've been using a lot recently that I absolutely love is the blob tree. And again, you can find,
I love the blob tree.
you can find this online, and I just feel it's so helpful. And it basically, just to explain what exactly it is, it's like this tree. Well, you've got a couple of different versions, but the one that I tend to use most is it's like a tree. And then you've got all these different blob people. So it's just like, like just very, very like basic characters of very basic like emotions on their face. So some of them like they look like they're angry, some look like they're upset, some look at they're very happy, and like, or some look scared, and they're all positioned around like the tree in different positions. But this can just be a really, really good tool of like actually be like, okay, let's have a look at the blob tree, right? First of all, what I do is I have a conversation like, okay, so what do you see here? And the child will say, oh, we've got a tree, lots of different people on it. And I'm like, what do you notice about the people? Oh, they all feel differently. And I'm like, all right, okay, so how does that one feel? And then so I do a little bit just to kind of gauge their level of understanding of the different emotions. Yeah. And it's interesting because everyone interprets it completely different. There's one that the way I interpret it is that the person looks scared, but it was a child. They said something completely different, and it was. But then once they had told me like their interpretation of how this person was experiencing, I was like, yeah, I can completely see that. So I feel it's very much it's child led. You let them kind of lead in how they interpret it, and then I would have like conversations like, okay, so if you had to pick one of the blob people that you are today, what one would you pick? And then like they might pick whatever one it is. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So why did you pick that one? How do you think that one feels? And it's just like, it's interesting. I think, again, it's this idea of it's not so intense of that direct sitting down, face to face, direct eye contact. How do you feel? And, it's quite intimidating. It's more like this idea of like, you've got this like this extra... this tool in the middle of you, so it's almost like a kind of triangle, like this tool in the middle, and you're actually like looking at that, because they do say, research does say actually when you're having difficult conversations, sometimes it's actually good to not necessarily have that intense eye contact. So they say sometimes that when you're driving in a car, sometimes that can actually be a really good time for people, for children to open up and things like that.
Like
because
that barrier, isn't there?
Yeah, because it's that way. It's just like, like you've got that different focus. But I like that idea, and you could use it you can ask all different questions, and it could be like, oh, and how did you feel this morning? And like, how do you think you'll feel tomorrow? Or how are you at school?
Should I tell you the one I really like? I always ask the same as you, which one do you feel like? But then I say, which one would you want to be like?
Oh, that's a good
because
one,
sometimes they feel a certain way. So there's one right at the top of the trees, and they're like this, and the kids always pick this one. They're like, I want to be this one. I'm like, why? How can we get from where you are here to there? What's making you like that and not like this? So I love that one. And you're saying about the different interpretations. The tree that you use, there's one with his back, or he or she, he's got the back. And so a lot of kids will say, oh, that one's angry because obviously he's turning his back to the rest of them, so he doesn't want to, which is a fair point, We would react that way if we were like cross angry, we'd withdraw or turn our back, but you can't see the face. And that's why this one's so interesting. And one kid said to me one day, I think that one's happy. I said, why? And I said, well, he's clearly looking at the rainbow in the background or the sunset in the background or something like that. And I was like, what a nice interpretation, that they're not seeing that as withdrawn, they're seeing that as he's just looking at the beauty in the world. And I was like, how interesting is it?
That's amazing. Do you know what's interesting? The other day I had a child and they actually picked that one, the one with the back.
Oh, really?
But their interpretation of it was like, oh, well, that one doesn't have a face yet, so I'll create my own face. And he actually drew his own like emotion, and then we talked a little bit about what that emotion was.
I feel like we need to do one just on the blob tree now,
fantastic.
like just an episode on the blob tree.
It's so simple. It's so such a simple, like when you see it, is it's very simple, like drawings, very simple emotions and things. But I think that's the thing about it. It's like a lot of the time, it's like the best thing is keep it simple. You don't have to complicate this, and like. Absolutely. And the children love it because it's a wee bit different. It's a little bit different,
That's it. It's an excellent tool that we use, like in our job, a lot to get into the child's world. And that's what it's about. I think parents just opening up these conversations through using a tool like the blob tree, through even when like reading storybooks. How do you think this child feels? What do you think? You're getting an insight into where they are and what they understand. So it's a really good resource that parents could use to explore that if you want to know, okay, what do they understand about emotions and what are they currently feeling and what do they think of like different situations. I feel like we've covered a lot.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this for forever.
This is a topic that's incredibly important, and it definitely deserves that exploration and thinking around the approaches we use, and really importantly, why we use them, because that's the key here.
This is it.
You know?
This, 100%. I'm just thinking, I'm going back to that. This is what I really like about that book, The Whole Brain Child, is like it gives you, because I feel like you get lots of like, parent strategies, but you don't necessarily know why they work. It's like, it almost like sounds like, that sounds like a good idea. But what I really like about the Whole Brain Child book is like they go into the brain development, like the different aspects of the brain and why it
makes
works.
it evidence-based.
Exactly. And I think the important thing to notice as well is like, 'cause I feel like some people do think, I'll try this new strategy. They try it one or two, a few times, and they're like, it doesn't work. So it's like they give up, and it can be quite confusing, because if the parents are changing their strategies all the time, it can be quite confusing. So I always say, it will take time. What we just need to do, we need to trust in the process, trust that this is the approach that we're taking. We know why we're taking it. We're taking it because obviously all the developments in research and neuroscience and the brain and how child develop and child psychology, if we can understand that philosophy and understand why we are acting and responding in the way that we are, and we're consistent with that, over time what's going to happen is like the neural pathways, the connections in the brain, they need to be formed, and they just need to be repeated over and over. It takes many times for a connection to become what we call automatic behaviour. So what we just need to do is trust in that process, repeat, and we can't put a time on it that's going to take so many. We just need to keep going with that. But I think the most important thing is just as long as we believe and trust, and I think maybe it's helpful as well, like for both parents, like to have a conversation about how they are going to approach things, so it's not conflicting and confusing for the child.
I think it's really, really important making that point and distinguishing like that this isn't about the quickest option.
No.
And I think that's where we'll see things like, timeout works because it extinguishes the behaviour in the short term. But
what are the long-term implications of that?
Exactly. And maybe that's one of the reasons why some of these things are frequently used, because it works short-term in that moment. And when we look at strategies over a long-term period and what we're trying to achieve, and
it's more difficult to manage, to measure, isn't it?
It's difficult to measure, and it's more difficult to do because you're having to sit with the pain and go through the pain, and it can be more emotionally taxing, more draining, and so a much longer process. But it's the why behind that's the important
thing. It stops it from
thing.
becoming cyclical as well, because then those strategies that them young people have learned, which might not be the best strategies, they might then use with their children.
Absolutely. Because they do say that you tend to parent based on how you were parented. Obviously, I feel like what happens is with each generation, there's certain things that maybe like people wouldn't have liked about how they were parented, and they're like, I'm not going to do that with my own children. But I think it's like sometimes there's that automatic, like responses or phrases and things like that because it's interesting. It's like things that you do say, you can almost hear your own parents, like the things that you say.
And you hear that sometimes from parents, don't you? Well, my parents did that with me, and I've turned out fine.
Yeah.
And you're like, are you though? Are you?
Yeah. So I think with everything we've talked about, it's clear there's so many different strategies out there. There's so many different things we can use. We've talked about calm boxes as tools, having like visual timetables, safety and sameness, and
blob tree.
The blob tree.
Books and things.
This is the thing, the whole child brain, where
it's the whole brain child. Sorry,
the whole brain child
brain
of where this information is coming from, where these strategies come from, and also emotional validation. And so they are strategies that we recommend in our role. And if you would like any further support or advice, please feel free to reach out to us on our Instagram page called Feel the Psychology. And always remember, if you feel like you're struggling with your mental health, or you feel like your child's struggling with something, then do reach out to a mental health professional for further support and advice. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.